Buenos días. Si os parece bien, vamos a ir comenzando esta Comisión de Asuntos Políticos. Primeramente, damos las bienvenidas a todos y a todas a este edificio y a todo el staff por haber organizado del Senado de España.
Thank you for organizing this event. I also welcome the Latin American component visiting this beautiful city, Madrid. Let us begin the Political Affairs, Security and Human Rights Committee, and I thank the parliamentarians for being here today. I thank the guest speakers for being here today, Mr. Botero, Don José de la Mata, Don Torreblanca, and Mr. Navas. And I also wish to thank the diplomatic staff from the European Union and others who are present with us today. Can I begin by welcoming also the Economic and Social Committee, the Latin American follow-up group, who are joining us in their capacity as permanent observers. Let me just inform you that we have interpretation into the following languages: Spanish, of course, Portuguese, English, French, in active and passive format. You may also speak Italian. We have web streaming for this meeting, and the meeting will be recorded. The streamed version will be published on the internet. Now, having given this introductory comments, let me move into the agenda itself now. And if time allows, we are starting at 9:20 with some delay. Let us proceed and ensure that we finish on time at 11. The draft agenda was distributed to all the members, but I'd like to remind members that we will need to add one item for the appointment of the new member of the Bureau of this committee. So we can adopt the draft agenda as amended, so with the change that I've just mentioned. Yes? Thank you. So the draft agenda is deemed adopted. Dear colleagues, the Latin American side is proposing the appointment of a new co-vice president, given that this post had been left vacant at the last meeting in Brussels, and under the rules of procedure of the Assembly in Article 3(2), it provides that the committees amongst the members will adopt a joint bureau presided over by co-presidents of equal status. The Latin American side is proposing Miriam Cisneros to fill this post of co-president. She is a parliamentarian from Ecuador and a member of the Palandino Parliament. Can we proceed to appointment by acclamation? Thank you. So the Bureau of our committee has now been renewed, and my congratulations to the new co-president of the committee. Let us continue now with the approval of the minutes of our Brussels meeting. Members will have received a copy of the draft minutes. And so if there are any comments, then please let us know. Now, proposals to changes to the minutes need to be sent into the Secretariat by 10 a.m. tomorrow. And if this is not the case, we will deem the minutes to have been adopted. Now, co-president's announcements. As I said, the meeting time we have is limited, but we should be able to go through the full agenda so that we can do this in a fluid and efficient way. And we hope that we will be fair and efficient in the way we give the floor. I remind speakers that they should speak for no more than 8 minutes for the opening statements and no more than 3 minutes for the concluding remarks, and no more than 2 minutes per participant for the debate itself. We need to have strict timekeeping due to the provision of interpretation services and the strict finishing time of 11 a.m. We need to cover all the items in our agenda, and with this in mind, I urge everyone to strictly speak to the speaking time. Can I also stress the importance of today's EuroLat meeting, which takes place after the EU-CELAC summit, which has been part of a major relaunching and boosting of relations and becoming closer of our peoples. In paragraph 34 of the summit conclusions, it talks about the importance of our parliamentary joint assembly, and it places great importance on the work that we do in our assembly. Now, we made a message heard in the EuroLat summit, and I wish to check if there are any comments to that now. If there are no comments, then we can move on to the next item, the draft report on international cooperation and multilateralism. Leopoldo López Gil is the co-rapporteur on the European side, and from the Latin American side we have Fernando Arce from the Parlamento Parliament on the Latin American side. Let us now move to the vote on the amendments to the report, and the members of Parliament, Leopoldo López Gil and Fernando Arce, have presented the report along with the amendments. And before we move to the vote on the amendments themselves, can I give the floor briefly to the co-rapporteurs to comment on the amendments that have been tabled to the draft report? And perhaps you might like to highlight the most important amendments, especially given that co-rapporteur Fernando Arce was unable to travel, and so I wanted to check if anyone will be replacing him from the Latin American side to present something on his behalf. Anyone from the Latin American side wishing to come in? Given that Mr. Arce isn't here? No? Well, in this case, can I give the floor to Leopoldo López Gil? Please do not take more than 2 minutes for the presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I regret that my co-rapporteur isn't here today. I think you will have all received the draft in time, and you'll have had a chance to look at the amendments. My recommendation is negative when it comes to the amendments, and I wish to back the report in its original form. Thank you very much. Can we now move to the vote pursuant to Rule 15 of this Assembly? We move straight to the vote.
Comenzamos la votación.
Let's begin the vote. Amendment 11, para 2. Votes in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. It's rejected. Amendment 12, paragraph 3. Votes in favor. Votes against. Abstentions. 1 abstention. It's rejected. Amendment 13 to paragraph 3. Votes in favor. Against. Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 14 and 15. If you agree, we'll take those together, and they deal with paragraph 4. Votes in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 16 in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 17 to paragraph 5. Those in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 19. Amendment 18, I do apologize. Amendment 18 to paragraph 6. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 19, paragraph 6. In favor? Amendment 19, part 1. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions? Rejected. Second part of Amendment 19. Those in favor? Against? Abstentions? Part 3 of Amendment 19. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 20, paragraph 6. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 21, 6A. First part. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Part 2 of Amendment 21. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 22. Para 6B. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 23, para 7. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 24, para 8. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 25, para 9. Votes in favor? Votes against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 26, 9A. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 27. Para 10. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected.
Enmienda número 28.
Amendment 28. Para 10. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 29. Para 11. In favor? Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 30. Para 12 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Adopted. 31 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Adopted. 32. Para 13 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 33. Para 13 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 34. Para 13 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 35. Para 13. Those in favor. Those against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 36. Para 14 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Adopted. Amendment 37. Para 14 in favor. Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 38. Para 14A. Those in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Shall we recount? We can have a recount. Let us be sure. Amendment 38 on para 14A. Those in favor? Those against? Abstentions?
Listos, considerando. Sí, aprobada, dije aprobada.
Adopted. I thought I'd said it. I didn't say it loud enough, sorry. 38 is adopted, and it was one of my own amendments. So, yes, it was remiss of me not to recount that vote. Now, the recitals. 12A, Amendment 1, in favor. Against? Abstentions? Carried. Amendment 2, those in favor? Against? Abstentions? Carried. We continue now. Recital A, those in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 4, Recital B, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 5, Recital D, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Recital Amendment 6, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 7, Recital F, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 8, Recital H, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected. Amendment 9, Recital I, in favor? Against? Abstentions? Rejected.
Falta la última enmienda, que es la número 10.
The last amendment, number 10, on recital I, in favor. Against, abstentions, rejected. So let us take the final vote now of the draft report as amended. Those in favor of the draft report in its final version, please raise your hands and keep your hands raised so we can count the votes. Votes against? Abstentions? So the report is adopted. 17 in favor, 1 against, and 1 abstention.
Y a partir de aquí cedo. Prepárate que te cedo la palabra. A partir de este punto, del número 5.
So now, item 5, we will begin with a topic for discussion. And from this point, I'd like to hand over the chair to Mr. Sicardi. It's my honor to hand the chair over from item 5 onwards.
Luego, para acabar, ya continúo nuevamente. Lo tienes por ahí el micro. A lo mejor. Ahí está. Ahí.
Sí, sí, ahora sí se escucha.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much. Thank you to all the members. I thank you, my friend Monica Silvana Gonzalez, my co-president, for your participation, and also thank you for allowing me to continue chairing now this discussion we're going to have. I wish to thank everyone. Let us move on and move to the topic for debate, the strengthening of judicial cooperation in the fight against transnational crime in the European Union, Latin America, and the Caribbean. We can now hold a debate on strengthening judicial cooperation in the fight against transnational crime in the European Union, Latin America, and in the Caribbean. Well, I think you will agree with me if I say that, sadly, the perception is that when it comes to judicial cooperation against organized crime, it's too often insufficient, too slow, and inefficient. The feeling is that the law is always lagging behind the actions of criminal gangs. However, we all agree that efficient functioning of systems, of criminal justice systems, is an absolutely indispensable requirement for successful international cooperation. Judicial cooperation in criminal matters must be based on universal values and principles, which include, of course, democracy, respect of the rule of law. These are fundamental principles for the principles of the separation of powers, the harmonization of rules, and mutual trust.
Creo que nuestras regiones
I do believe that our regions share, more than with any other region around the world, these very principles that should be at the core of our judicial cooperation when it comes to criminal matters. And in spite of this, we still find that there is room for further improvement in this cooperation. And that's why we feel pleased when we saw that in the declaration of the EU-CELAC summit, there was a point on consolidating and strengthening cooperation between the European Union and the CELAC on civil security, social justice matters. And in this context, we want to fight organized crime in all its forms, along with corruption and money laundering, and in particular develop strength, work on capacity buildings. At this very summit, there were also references to the need for greater cooperation in this field. Now, it's very clear that the experts who have been invited to participate in today's meeting will no doubt shed light on the principles and challenges that we will need to meet in order to strengthen cooperation in criminal matters, judicial cooperation, and which measures will be helpful in the current context. And they will help us to identify, as parliaments, for the right measures that need to be taken. So today, in our meeting, we have two guest speakers with us. Our eminent guests, Enrique Gil Botero, Secretary General from the Conference of Justice Ministers of the Ibero-American countries. We also have José de la Mata, a magistrate from Spain in Eurojust. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation today. You each have 8 minutes now to make your opening statements and presentations. And then later on today, the members of the committee will have an opportunity to speak as well. And then our guest speakers will be invited to respond to the questions or the comments that may have been raised. Now, can I begin by giving the floor to Mr. Gil Botero, first of all?
Distinguidos parlamentarios de EuroLat,
members of Parliament of EuroLat, guests, all participants, I'd like to welcome you to this meeting and thank you for the invitation. First of all, I'd like to thank you very warmly for all the work that's been done by this joint assembly in the areas of justice, security and human rights. 1 week after the summit held in Brussels, the CELAC summit, which was the first one in 8 years, it has become ever clearer that cooperation between Europe and Latin America in these areas, as in many others, is absolutely essential, because it is only through cooperation that we can achieve the legal security and certainty that we need in order to build on our alliances and to tackle organized crime. Cross-border organized crime is a major threat to peace in all our countries. So I'd like to thank the Commission for taking the initiative it did, for promoting the introduction of legislative powers which are necessary to tackle violence and to bring an end to abuse, exploitation of torture of children, to tackle the problem of illicit financial flows between Latin America and Europe, illegal arms transports, and many other issues. There's also issues such as tackling corruption more widely, terrorism, recovery of stolen assets, and promoting the rule of law. These are all absolutely imperative, and they're part of the SDGs adopted by the UN. Organized crime between Europe and Latin America constitutes a huge threat to the legal security of our countries, and it affects the social, economic, political, and cultural development of our societies. It is something which manifests itself in many different ways. For example, we all know drugs trafficking, human trafficking, trafficking in arms, illicit immigration, the production of and transport and distribution of counterfeit medicines, cybercrime, money laundering, to mention but a few. And in order to tackle all these scourges, it is vital for us to have the appropriate supranational structures, which we need to build on an intergovernmental basis. So, honourable members of Parliament, one of the things which is so important in international organisation is to constitute a real network of international cooperation so that we can have closer relations and more straightforward and streamlined relations between governments and improve governance. This is what Anne-Marie Slaughter and Thomas Hale call trans-governmental networks, and they're institutions which bring together regulators, legislators, judges, and other actors who work on a cross-border basis. In 2014, the Hague Summit made statements on this and the importance of building the European and international legal networks. The Ibero-American Legal Cooperation Network is a case in point. It was established in 2004 and it's instrumental in tackling organised crime. This is something which we have to do on a cross-border basis, and it needs coordinated response and an effective response. So we have also established the platform EuroLat, and this facilitates exchange of information of a judicial nature, documents, better exchange of best practice, and a mutual cooperation across all our countries. We also have, of course, the Ibero-American Conference of Ministers of Justice, which was set up in Medellin in Colombia in 2019. And this has been an important step forward in taking forward legal cooperation and using technology to facilitate it. It enables real-time exchange of information and cooperation, and therefore it harmonizes many types and streamlines many types of judicial cooperation. For example, in the case of an extradition which might have taken months or years with the Treaty of Medellin, it can be achieved in merely minutes. So the Medellin Treaty actually makes it easier to deal with requests for mutual legal assistance, and it makes it easier to use the platform Ibarra for real-time exchange and transmission of documentation. Of course, security of platforms and such networks is absolutely critical, and this is why we have focused on achieving the highest of standards in this. At the moment, it is the states which are responsible for organizing the structure and structuring the exchange of cooperation which takes place under the umbrella of this treaty. It's all part of IberRed in terms of Latin America, and this means that it, of course, is very wide-ranging and indeed it has a global reach. Europe and Latin America have got to continue to work in the area of legal cooperation because it makes a major contribution in the wider geopolitical sphere to tackling disinformation, which is such a problem in various countries that we know, some more than others, but it is in all of them. So it is important that all countries can be able to act more effectively through their judicial bodies to tackle international crime. In the case of Europe and Latin America, which is our particular focus today, a lot of progress has been made since the establishment of the EuroLat platform with Eurojust, which is the EU agency for criminal cooperation. There are 28 users from 16 EU countries already: Austria, Germany, Belgium, Cyprus, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Greece, Italy, Lithuania, Latvia, Malta, Portugal, Romania, and Sweden. And then there are 300 Ibero-American users and other Interpol offices which also participate in this agreement. Cooperation between Europe and Latin America is extremely important and is the backbone, really, of many of these programs and technical support programs which run through EuroLat. There is, for example, PACTO, which is a program for international cooperation financed by the European Union to promote security and justice in Latin America and tackle organized crime. Honourable members, the Secretary General wants to build stronger relationships with all regional bodies to take forward cooperation with the objective, ultimately, of having better connected justice, more modern justice, more effective, more efficient administration and distribution of justice. And this is why it's important to bring together all these bodies through the multidisciplinary program to tackle organized crime. The recent summit in Brussels, which, as I said, was the first one in 8 years, shows that we are on the right path and we are all committed to tackling these issues because we've got social cohesion and tackling organized crime at international level as top priorities in the summit declaration, and therefore I very much welcome that. In conclusion, I'd like to say that it's extremely important for us to continue building on these networks of legal cooperation. It is essential for the future. We need to have optimal structure and administration in our judicial systems. This is going to be instrumental in establishing a global community based on the rule of law. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for all your contributions, and I hope I am finishing on time. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Enrique.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Gil Botero, who's the Secretary General of the Conference of Ministers of Justice from the Ibero-American countries. That was an excellent introduction into this debate. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Mr. José de la Mata, who is a magistrate and national member for Spain in Eurojust. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much indeed. Co-presidents, good morning, everybody, and my thanks to you for this invitation. It is a great pleasure to be here on behalf of Eurojust, making this presentation in what is a very important meeting. May I briefly introduce Eurojust to you. It's a European agency which is responsible for judicial cooperation in criminal matters. It brings together magistrates and prosecutors, and it has an independent statute. Our role is nothing to do with the International Criminal Court, and it's not anything to do with the EPPO. We don't carry out investigations under their auspices. We facilitate cooperation between prosecutors and judicial authorities and judges within the European Union and out with the European Union international level in some of the most important cases that are investigated. So it's a facilitating role that we play. Once an investigation begins, when raids take place on the ground, when detentions take place, when people are in prison, when they're subject to initial detention and questioning, all these steps in legal procedure are coordinated by us across borders. We deal with victim compensation, and we offer technical support to judges and prosecutors and magistrates in this endeavour, in the context of transnational cases. In accordance with our statutes, we have been involved in hundreds of cases, offering assistance to cases involving third countries out with the European Union as well. Our role runs across a number of different policy areas. We have contact points, for example, and I think all the Latin American countries have very close relationships with you just because you have contact points and you maintain close contact through that. Then we have working arrangements which operate at a strategic institutional level, and this enables us to work closely together, and intensively when necessary we can exchange information and we can cooperate at a strategic level. And then finally we have another level of work which is governed by international agreements. And these international agreements are established between the European Commission and governments of a third country. Now, at the moment, we are halfway through the 2019-20, more than halfway through the 2019-2023 period for Eurojust. Negotiations are ongoing, and we hope that more agreements will be signed shortly. One of the things I should highlight is that these agreements are negotiated down the course of the 4 years with some 13 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Colombia, which are 3 Latin American countries, which have been selected specifically as members of the first priority group with which we should be signing one of these international intergovernmental agreements. So these encompass strategic objectives, but particularly practical objectives. And the idea of the agreement is to achieve a number of different goals. One thing is to facilitate exchange of data and personal data pertaining to criminal investigations. This is between judges, magistrates, and prosecutors. And then the second thing that's critical, which happens in The Hague, is to bring together the liaison officers. This happens in The Hague. They meet in The Hague in Eurojust, which is where all the member states are represented, but also some 10 third countries who have prosecutors and liaison officers in our offices. They are seconded to Eurojust, and this is extremely important, and it underpins a lot of international legal cooperation. It has actually enabled us to make great strides forward in the quality of our international work. So it's absolutely of paramount importance, and I want to underline that. We also are involved with European parliaments and Latin American parliaments in information sharing, and we are trying to make it clear to all these partners how important it is that all these countries' governments participate in the negotiations on the international agreements, because they are critical looking to the future as a very important part of our way forward. So we have a number of different instruments and a number of different mechanisms, for example, international cooperation in international crime, which need to be updated. We've actually perhaps taken our finger off the pulse there, because some of the tools and instruments which international organized crime uses are ahead of our level of operation. So we have taken our finger off the pulse here a bit. There's been effectively a revolution in terms of international organized crime, and therefore we need to replicate that. We need to ensure that we have equally high-level and comprehensive international networks to tackle organized crimes. And we are putting in place the appropriate standards. We're establishing closer diplomatic channels, closer judicial channels, and we are seeing better, more effective legal cooperation at the appropriate level, direct cooperation between judicial authorities across the various states involved. In terms of the international agreements, there was the 1959 Council of Europe Agreement, and there was the 2000 Agreement, and we've now moved on to establish principles of cooperation and direct recognition, direct mutual recognition. But we need to go further than that. And therefore, with that in mind, we really need to do away with all the international borders in terms of cross-border legal cooperation. We recognize this, but it's one thing to recognize it, it's another thing to do it. Of course, the EPPO does exist. We have the European prosecutors in place, and they've been working for a number of years. But of course, their work is to preserve the community finance interests, and we need to take their work much further than that, because we have to put in place the appropriate mechanisms for investigation and joint investigation teams in a much greater number of cases than we've managed so far. The ratification of international and regional and bilateral agreements in the overall context of international judicial cooperation is really important, and it has enabled us to make great strides forward. In terms of standards, technology, of course, is extremely important. And we do need to ensure that we legislate, because we may not have physical borders, But whether or not we do, we can transmit information across borders using data. So we can do remote ID, we can communicate through video conferences, we can exchange information for identification purposes. We don't need to have people there in person. Of course, we do have some linguistic problems, but in the Latin American community, you have fewer linguistic problems than we have in Europe. I'm talking, of course, about the Ibero-American community, whereas in Europe, we've got 27 plus languages recognized, and of course, we use non-EU languages as well. And although we can have recourse to machine translation, and that's a step forward, it's not everything. Then, of course, there's the technical aspect. We need to interconnect systems. We need the same standards for real-time transmission and access. So together with the legislative framework and the technological framework, there are other important things that we need to do to take forward judicial cooperation internationally. And we need to work, this needs to take place at a more informal level. So it's personal relationships, it's interaction. So we need to improve the mechanisms for support and for mutual assistance. And Eurojust does this effectively. It's actually one of the most effective tools that there is to support legal and judicial investigations. So this is something we wish to build on, and we want to roll it out more widely because we realize this is a very good way of supporting international, cross-border and transcontinental criminal investigations. And that's, of course, where the Latin American and European communities, judicial communities would come together most frequently. Both in the European Union and in Latin America, there are networks achieving good levels of international cooperation. We've got the joint investigation teams, and we've also got a number of conventions. We've got all kinds of legal and judicial networks that have been established more formally and less formally across the decades with Latin America. But the important thing is to keep developing them, to establish judicial networking, because this makes a major contribution to exchange of information, to communication, to dialogue. And the agreements that we have in place are an excellent basis that we have to build on them with these personal level contacts, formal and informal cooperation, working ever more closely together so that we can achieve the objectives that we've defined ourselves, which is, after all, to bring to court and convict people who have committed international cross-border crimes. So essentially, Eurojust is about stronger together. That is our logo, stronger together, juntos más fuertes. And that, stronger together, is our motto. And this is what must underpin all our relationships between Europe and Latin America, because together we are so much more than the sum of the parts. I could speak at much greater length about this, but we do need to build on the links that we have, because together we are always stronger. And if we, whether in a coordinated, effective, efficient way together, we are even more stronger. We are even more strong. And this is really the only way in which we can vanquish organized crime. International organized crime is a big threat. Thank you.
Al señor de la Mata.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. de la Mata and Gil Botero. Both are eminent experts. Thank you. Now, I give the floor to all speakers for a maximum of 2 minutes each, with no possibility for a follow-up question, to comment on this very important topic. I give the floor to the members of the committee.
La diputada Rodríguez, adelante. Tiene la palabra.
Ms. Rodriguez, honourable member, you have the floor.
Pues muchas gracias.
Thank you very much indeed, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Gil Botero and Mr. De la Mata, for your presentations. The final part that you ended on, us being stronger together, juntos más fuertes, well, I think that's the key thing, and that we need to understand when we fight international crime. When it comes to drugs trafficking, but also people trafficking, we do find these large criminal incorporations. They're like multinational companies. They are not even specialized in one form of crime, whether it's drugs trafficking or people trafficking. I've had many opportunities in my parliamentary activities to speak with the person in the United Nations responsible for following up on these phenomena, and I think it became very clear that we have a responsibility to stay on top of these issues. Otherwise, we will be failing the victims, the ones who suffer the most. Now, what I thought was very interesting what you said about the platform and the progress that's been made in Eurojust. Just wanted to talk about also the prosecution services cooperating in The Hague. I wanted to ask about how these mechanisms are making substantial progress when it comes to following the money, for example, and money laundering, human trafficking. Human trafficking is either it's ahead of drugs trafficking or arms trafficking quite often in terms of turnover and the amount of money generated here. So I think we need clear ideas on how to track these criminal bodies, and you can't track illegal funds if we do this in national silos. We need to not only adapt our context for international cooperation, we have to be revolutionary. We have to update our networks. We know that criminal gangs are using them. Your time is running up, madam. They're networking as well. The criminal gangs too are networking. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Can I ask the members of parliament to please be very stringent in their timekeeping? No more than 2 minutes each, please. Can I give the floor to Alejandro Carles? You have the floor, honourable member, for 2 minutes.
Hola. Hi. Sí. Buenos días. Un placer saludarlo.
Good morning. My greetings to you. And I think this is an extremely important topic for all of our peoples. I come from the Mercosur Parliament. As you will know, Mercosur has some 14 million square kilometers of land in the Latin American continent. And in fact, international agreements play a major part for us. The free movement area of the Los Rios area, we see that we've got some 4,800 kilometers of rivers that we can basically no longer control on our own. This is a major problem. And we need to deal with the cross-border issues. If we think about what is happening in that region, you have to multiply it by a factor of 15. If you think about people crossing a border with just a rucksack, that's a drop in the ocean when you compare it to what's happening in the rivers in Latin America. I think we're talking about a completely different scale, different. We're talking about here 20 million tons of smuggled soy, for example, that's been going around the globe. It's reaching everyone. I think in these international fora, it's very important that we look at the agreements which make it life difficult for the countries that do have a clear desire to crack down on trafficking, smuggling, and which are so crippling for our development. Now, I very much hope that we will see progress, as we've heard in Argentina. There's work being done. One thing that's still missing for our people, we should have all the pieces of the puzzle in place. Right now, some state bodies are lagging behind when it comes to the judicial powers. We need to really double down on our efforts here and collaborate. Thank you.
Parlamentario, vamos a darle la oportunidad.
Thank you. Can I now give the opportunity to the European side? Herman Touch, you have the floor for 2 minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you to Gil Botero and Mr. De la Mata for your presentations. I'd like to raise the following point, and this is a very current issue. It's a pressing issue. What's the role of states in drugs trafficking and international crimes and international trafficking networks that we're seeing? We see regular evidence of certain states, certain governments being involved. We have evidence surfacing regularly. And we know that there are government bodies sometimes blocking legal proceedings, blocking investigations, or blocking extradition in the context of the fight against drugs trafficking, especially in drugs trafficking, where we see there are connections between government forces and state forces, and that are very, very blatant and obvious to see. So I wondered whether there's any step that can be taken to try and enable us to better deal with these state interventions. Thank you very much, and I give the floor to Mrs. Bilbao from the European side.
Sí, buenos días y
Good morning, and thank you very much. I thought Gil Botero and Mr. De la Mata made very interesting presentations. Now, going beyond the existing platforms that we've already heard about from Mr. De la Mata, what else can we do right away, aside from agreements? We already have some tools. It seems that some of them are not up and running properly yet. What else is standing in the way from us improving on the operational level? And also, when we speak about cooperation in regard to involving prosecutors and judges within Eurojust, we need to think about training aspects as well, perhaps. Because we need to ensure that people are able to participate in fully in information exchange. Would this be a potential area where we can do more? Is this an area where we're perhaps lagging behind? And finally, when we talk about drugs trafficking or money laundering, there are banking authorities, banking groups, which are participating in some way. Now, obviously, we won't have a clear-cut list of which banking body is cooperating, but I wondered whether we can look at improving our cooperation with banking bodies and so banks. I wondered whether in our agreements we are discussing this aspect. And finally, we're very, very pleased that in the Renew group and also in my political party, that we've got a new CELAC EU agreement, and that we held this summit after years, we needed this new impetus, this new momentum. Many people had been saying that in Latin America and Europe, we are seeing common shared problems that we should be tackling together. So I very much hope that this marked a decisive step forward and that we're seeing a step up of cooperation. And it's not just fine speeches, but actually actions as well. Please wrap up. Thank you. And I do apologize. Thank you for your comments. Now let's give the floor to Mr. Castaldo. You have 2 minutes.
Muchísimas gracias, estimados copresidentes.
Thank you very much indeed, co-presidents, colleagues. Thank you very much indeed for your invitation and hospitality. As you've said, transnational crime is an increased threat, and it requires cooperation across and between our regions. As a coordinator of agreements on criminal and civil justice, I was involved in the agreement that was adopted with Argentina together with our colleague Espinosa. And this was in 2022, and we agreed that we need to have much more effective means to tackle cross-border crime, because organized crime knows no bounds and it mercilessly exploits every opportunity to commit crimes. Europe may have made progress, Latin America has made progress, but what we need to do is bring together the judicial systems we have across the water and build on the structures that we have so that we can work ever more closely together, both as regions but also globally. This is a very important opportunity for us. Eurojust has taken a lot of very excellent measures to enhance mutual cooperation and cross-agency cooperation. And therefore, I myself would like to see a binding bi-regional agreement or convention to tackle cross-border crime. This is something which should be an ongoing priority for us. It's extremely important, and in the context of enforcement, execution of sentences and so forth, it is really important that we address all the problems that we are. This means we need to work with NGOs and civil society so that we have stakeholder support for the initiatives that we take. Last year, we saw what could be achieved by Eurojust's cross-border approach, and I'd like to ask Mr. José Lamata whether Eurojust can follow up on some of the proposals that were contained in my report. And I'd like to ask Mr. Gil Botero whether he thinks there has been progress with the relationships established between Latin America and Europe in recent times, whether we've successfully built on them, and what he thinks still remains to be done to achieve even better cooperation. Thank you very much.
Gracias. Nos acompañan los consejeros del Comité Económico.
We now have the floor open for the Economic and Social Committee. If you wish to come in as our observers, if you like to comment, you can. Carlos Silva, if you wish to speak, you can, for 2 minutes, on behalf of the Economic and Social Committee. I should like to make my comments in Portuguese. And so very, very quickly, let me say thank you for inviting the Economic and Social Committee. I'm chair of the committee that deals with EU Latin American issues. We have 2 further colleagues in the other room, and our participation and representation of civil society, which we represent in our committee. Our partners and our opinions, as you will know, are not binding opinions. They are sent to the Parliament, to Council, and to the European Commission. And the interventions that we've just heard from the eminent experts in the field of justice are very enlightening indeed. And in fact, we don't feel that this is the time for us to express our main viewpoints and opinions. We wish to thank you for allowing us to participate in this committee. And tomorrow at our EuroLat meetings, we will have an opportunity to discuss the civil society concerns, where we will be organizing a dedicated meeting. Thank you, and good work to you all.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much to our friends from the Economic and Social Committee. Now, can I give the floor to the Member of Parliament from the Dominican Republic, Faril Raful, for 2 minutes, please. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. Relating to the Dominican Republic, what I can say is that we are at the very center of the Caribbean region, and we find ourselves in a strategic region when it comes to drugs trafficking, but also money laundering, which transits through Central America, even though it isn't produced in our countries. But we represent something of a bridge between Latin America and the United States. We do have a law and an ongoing struggle against drugs trafficking, but sadly, due to the institutional problems that we encounter, in spite of the agreements that we have, we are unable to effectively fight against the problem. There are also problems of complicity with different authorities, public authorities, which means that investigations aren't always effective. We have Colombia, for example, where progress has been made and they've moved forward a great deal. So we, as a region, however, in cooperation with Europe, we actively cooperate, of course. Europe is a destination country for some of the drugs that are trafficked. I wondered, what more can we do as a region? What can we do against persecution? We've got political connections, we've got connections, and we've got also financial bodies that are helping to make the money laundering possible. So what more should we do? We've got Gafi, we've got FATCA, we've got an agreement with the United States. What more should we do? Thank you very much, Ms. Raful. We would like to allow all members of the committee to be able to speak, but we are running out of time, so let us go to the end of the speakers list and conclude here with Ms. González, and then also hear from Monica Silvana González, our co-president. And so Ms. González, first of all. Thank you very much. Just 2 minutes, please. Dear fellow parliamentarians, international crime is a major threat to our societies on both continents. In Mexico, as a key player of the Latin American side, has... If the speaker could speak into the microphone, please. It's difficult to hear the speaker.
Para enfrentar eficazmente a los grupos criminales. El gobierno mexicano ha implementado diversas estrategias y acciones para combatir la delincuencia y reducir la violencia asociada a estas organizaciones, a través de la hoy conocida Guardia Nacional, que ha demostrado contundencia en sus resultados, enfocándose en promover la proximidad social y prevenir delitos. Desde el primer día de su abanderamiento, ha llevado a cabo un trabajo de inteligencia táctico y operativo que ha dado frutos significativos en el primer año.
Now, in the first year of its creation, we saw it bearing fruits. 10.9 million euros, $1 million were seized. In Mexico, major steps have been taken to combat criminal gangs by working and cooperating with countries in the region and international bodies such as the United Nations body on drugs control and Europol and other bodies that combat international organized crime. We've been able to capture international gang leaders and share good practice when it comes to security matters. I think it's important to mention that we need to tackle the problem of people trafficking and crime, which are major scourges, and as has been shown by the report on on people trafficking. Please wrap up your comments. You've run out of time. Now, in Europe, we are seeing the cybercrime unit is showing that millions and billions are being lost in Europe, with an impact being felt in Latin America. Now, to conclude, we should be working tirelessly to help our citizens to wipe out transnational crime and promote peace and security in our regions. Thank you.
Vamos a finalizar esta.
Thank you very much. Let us conclude this round of comments and hear finally from Monica Silvana Gonzalez. You have 2 minutes, madam. No microphone for the speaking. Well, we do have very little time, and I thank the interpreters and I, of course, understand that they need decent working conditions in order to carry out their work. I thank the eminent experts for their presentation, like Mr. Botero and Magistrate de la Mata, for raising points that are of great concern for us in this committee. In addition to the great work that's being done in Eurojust in Europe, the pact is an important and tangible aspect of our cooperation. Can I thank Director Juan Gama and his team who make this work possible in the FIAP agency, the Spanish agency, and making this cooperation possible in Latin America. We have discussed this in the past, just as we've discussed it in the Latin American parliaments. We talked about the idea of establishing an international Latin American and Caribbean court for the Latin American region. This initiative is seeking to focus on international crime, and dealing with illegal criminal proceeds and serious crimes. Now, this initiative would be all about keeping track of transnational crime in the Latin American region. Now, my question to both experts: what is your opinion on this initiative, this idea of having illegal criminal economic gains and transnational crime being taken apart and dealt with separately? You know, we know that this is being discussed in Italy in the context of mafia activities. So the idea of the Coppola initiative, whether this would be useful, or is it simply a case of proliferation of yet more agencies and yet more bodies? So I'd like to hear your opinion on that, because that's an important topic that's being discussed not only in this committee, but in other Latin American parliaments as well.
De esta forma finalizamos las conclusiones.
This concludes the round of questions from members of the parliaments. Can I now give the floor back to our experts to wrap up and conclude, and to respond to the questions that have been raised and addressed to them? Please take 2 minutes for this. Can I give the floor, first of all, to Mr. Gil Botero? Thank you very much, honourable members. I can be very telegraphic in my comments due to timekeeping issues. There are some key issues. There's a problem of macro transnational crime and a prosecution system that is either not adapted due to its system and the way it's designed. Those are the main premises that we have. So the response is strengthening justice system through technology. Organized crime is constantly taking up new technologies, and at the same time, justice is lagging behind, is not keeping up with the times. When it comes to networking, that's one such response. It is a good important response. And there's one important point. IBER-RED, the IBER-RED Iberian network, is something that's being promoted, and it's being operated in the best possible way. The Medellin Agreement treaty is already entered into force. And as members of parliament have already raised, we need to ensure that we can ratify that agreement. The Medellin Agreement has already been adopted, and it's, however, not sufficient on its own. Extradition will require the use of this secure platform as a secure platform that is there to be used. And just a final comment on the Inter-American, Latin American, Caribbean Court, Criminal Court. I think I would be favorable for any kind of body that will be efficient and actually making a tangible contribution, not only adding bureaucracy. Then, that takes into account the idiosyncrasies and the specific needs in the regional context. I would welcome any such initiatives, yes, so that we can tackle the specific nature of international crimes. I could spend a whole day discussing this, because I think we would be able to achieve great things in this way, but I do understand that we have time constraints. And so I'd like to wrap up here.
Gracias, Enrique.
Thank you very much, Enrique Gilbertero, from the Conference of Ministers of Justice of the Ibero-American countries. Now, to wrap up for 2 minutes, José de la Mata, a magistrate in Eurojust. You have the floor. Thank you. I can also be very brief. How can we track the money? Well, we have to do this by having ongoing economic and criminal investigations running in parallel. We need to strengthen the administrative and management bodies that deal with assets and operational units. Now, what happens when there's an official body that's involved, an official body's been somehow implicated? Well, we have to strengthen informal cooperation then. So, for example, Eurojust, which can continue its investigation, strengthening the independence of prosecution and prosecutors and the judiciary. We also have to move forward when it comes to strengthening the move to eliminate legal borders, jurisdictional borders, and move forward on mutual recognition and improve support for investigations, and also investigative police, investigative units, and ensure that we can strengthen the independence of these units, which support the work of prosecutors. What can we do in the immediate term? What do we do now? People have raised this. We need to seize assets and move forward when it comes to mutual recognition of procedures. If you look at the quantum leap that we've seen in terms of extradition orders, and all of this happened in a matter of just weeks, but it's almost unbelievable. But it's the resources that we need. This may seem obvious, but we need to allocate resources. We need to make the right decisions and hit crime where it hurts, hit criminals where it hurts. Now, Obviously, we can focus on drugs trafficking, but there are many other aspects I could cover. We need to ensure that we have international coordination of investigations going through the joint investigation team model. Thank you.
Concluimos aquí. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you very much. We shall conclude that debate there, and my thanks to the invited experts in particular for their extremely valuable contributions they've made to a very rich debate on this topic. So thank you very much indeed.
Vamos a darle un fuerte aplauso a nuestros invitados.
I think a round of applause for our experts is only right and proper because they've given us very interesting and apposite important information. Thank you. Our next item now is a debate on enhancing cooperation with the protection of digital rights. Now, we are all constantly reflecting on whether the digital transformation is something which is a benefit to us or to our detriment. In the vast majority of countries, there may be a bit of each. I think that there is, however, consensus on the need for us to achieve a digital transformation which is focused on the individual, because we need above all to avoid any sort of abusive exploitation by authoritarian regimes of the technological instruments we have available to us. And we must also make sure that there is no commercial exploitation of individual rights. So, of course, it's extremely important for us to address these issues. We need to address the question of disinformation in social platforms and social networks, for example. This is very visible, as is indeed the impact it has on individual rights, people's own image, people's privacy. But it is also important that we address the societal aspect of it, which it means the protection of democracy. It's possible, looking at the internet, to see quite clearly that anybody has the power to intervene in such a way as to shape the decisions that are made by millions of people. And this has political implications, and therefore, in terms of best practice and the rules and requirements applying to the major technological platforms, we need to take urgent action. We need to remember that we need to have equitable access to the internet, that we need to protect individual rights, and we need to have digital inclusion. So there are all these different aspects of it which all interact. And so with that in mind, we've asked some expert to come along and try to identify the major challenges for us, how to protect individuals' digital rights at this moment in time when we have major challenges to address and when our members of parliament are all grappling with how to protect individuals' rights, at the same time deliver the digital transition on an inclusive basis. So I'm very pleased, indeed I'm delighted, that we have two eminent guests with us. One is José Ignacio Torreblanca, who's the head of the Madrid delegation and a political analyst. Indeed, he's a senior political analyst in the European Council for Foreign Affairs. And we've also got Leonardo Cervera Navas, who is the General Secretary in the European Data Protection Supervisor. So my warmest thanks to both of you for having accepted this invitation to participate in this meeting today. I would invite you to address the Assembly for 8 minutes each to make a presentation on this, and then subsequently we will give members of the committee the opportunity to ask questions, and you will have time to respond to these questions, obviously, at the end. So first of all, may I give the floor to Mr. Torreblanca for 8 minutes. You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much indeed, co-presidents, for the invitation. I think we're all absolutely committed to interparliamentary cooperation and to working together on regulation, because we know that we're very much at the boundary of human rights considerations in so many ways here. I work here in Madrid, but we have our foreign offices too, and we're trying to put together a more effective and cohesive European policy to protect individual rights. This is to be done obviously nationally, but also multilaterally. And this plays into many of the topical debates and brings in much of the work that we've done at the interface of geopolitics and technology, which we've been doing for a number of years. This has implications for individual rights and for rights in society and in our democracies. The digital transition the Chairman has just alluded to is extremely important. We need to see this in its context. The context is that of a triple transition. It's not just the digital transition, which is bringing about a veritable industrial revolution in terms of primary raw materials and critical raw materials, but also a green revolution, which has a number of different elements to it, and of course a technological strand too. These offer major opportunities for reindustrialization in all our countries, and this applies clearly to Latin America in the same way as it does to Europe. But there's also an inherent risk that they will worsen the divides between countries and within societies, that they will create a worse digital divide. And we're also undergoing a geopolitical transition, a world which is not so much based on rules and rights as on spheres of influence and power. And therefore we have seen sovereignty invoked in defense of interventions. And we have seen attempts by those who seek to establish spheres of influence and shore up their sovereignty. And we've basically taken decades steps backwards in terms of the quality of democracy in our countries. And social media and platforms have got a huge role to play in this. They've been instrumental in the deterioration of the quality of democracy in our public spaces, and in turn the confidence that citizens have in their politics and their institutions. Latin America and Europe share an approach based on principles and values. Might I highlight, for example, that it is important for us to try to regulate IA in Europe. The same is true here in Latin America. We are in both continents focusing on UN principles, whereas in China and in Russia, the strategy for international for IA is focused on the defense strategy, in trying to shore up geopolitical power and enhance the position of the country vis-à-vis its rivals. The same is happening in China, where we see that technology is being used to exert ever greater control over the population and to export these surveillance technologies to countries which are fragile and vulnerable, so that again the interference in the democratic structures of this country can be increased, and the vulnerability of the country likewise. Therefore, much has been happening over recent years which is not necessarily to be welcomed. But what is to be welcomed is the digital alliance that's been established in the CELAC summit between the EU and Latin America. It brings together two processes which have been developing in parallel in Latin America and in Europe. And this cooperation in the digital transition area is absolutely vital, because it creates an opportunity for us to bring about reindustrialization in these two countries based on rules rather than powers and spheres of influence, and to do so on a just and equitable way. Strategic autonomy has been much vaunted in Europe in recent years, but strategic autonomy has also got to be the strategic autonomy and sovereignty of our Latin America friends. And this is exactly what we have signed up to in agreements that were signed in CELAC. And this is so important. Likewise, the critical materials agreement that was signed between the EU and Chile, because this aspires to be based not on colonialization of data or extraction of maximum amounts, but trying to ensure that the digital the digitalization of industry can be harnessed in order to ensure that developments on the ground in industry can be more equitable. The global gateway brings us together in many different ways, overcoming gulfs between societies and countries, forging stronger economies, and the second pillar, which is so important, is that of security. Not only in cybersecurity, which is, of course, of paramount importance in industry, as we've seen, and in governments and for citizens, but equally in terms of the protection of our democracies as we conceive them today, electoral systems founded on principles and rules. Parliaments, public institutions, they are critical institutions, and they are objects which are all too often the subject of attack from outside. Our respective regions have seen how votes in the UN can be subverted if one of the major actors opposed to us does not wish a vote to go through the UN. Attacks can take place on public institutions as punishment, as a sanction, to punish them for having spoken out in the international fora in defense of principles. Europe has very valuable experience in regulation, codes of conduct, best practice, regulating platforms. This is very important, and in Latin America, it is clear that disinformation on COVID caused huge damage to public health. We've all experienced this, and we realize the importance of reining in the power of platforms and ensuring that we're in constant dialogue with them to ensure they operate more safely. Then the most important aspect is the regulation of the digital sector and protection of rights. We're taking action on this in Europe, and we would like to get more involved on a joint basis across the Latin America and EU parliaments so that we can work together on regulation. This is really important in terms of data regulation, but also more widely, and we will have further opportunities to discuss this, I know, when Mr. Rivera speaks. Subsequently, we've got to have data adequacy agreements between Latin America and the EU. We have some in place, but we need to build on these. They're just as important as the commercial agreements and the trade agreements that we very much hope will be concluded shortly, because the data economy is integral to commercial relations and to trade agreements, and that's so important to all of us. We need to make sure that the markets are regulated in such a way as to protect democracy from foreign intervention, interference by third parties, which is something the European Union has experienced very much to its detriment. And we know very much too what the role of generative IA could be and how we need to regulate that and ensure that it's done on a proper basis, because this could offer further opportunities for disinformation and foreign intervention, as indeed could through cybersecurity instruments. So we need to protect minors, we need to protect data, we need to protect our societies, our individuals, and democracy. Therefore, there are huge challenges, and I think the EU CELAC summit has established a very clear-cut and ambitious roadmap for developing cooperation between the two regions. The European institutions, in particular the European Parliament, is very well aware of the need to open up, extend and deepen the discussion on regulation, on democracy, on future relations, and to enable the parliaments to the extent possible to meet together, for example, with the committees, in the comparable committees in the Latin American Parliament, so they can exchange information on regulatory matters as well as other things. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed for that very interesting presentation. To Mr. José Blanco, who's the head of the delegation in Madrid and a member of the European Council for Foreign Relations. The next speaker, our other invited guest, is Leonardo Cervera Navas, who is the General Secretary of the European Data Protection Supervisor. And it is my pleasure to give you the floor for 8 minutes.
Y el plenario también.
You have the floor, sir. Thank you very much, President, Chairman. Thank you, distinguished members of Parliament, experts, authorities, assistants. Good morning. The founder of the European project, Jean Monnet, said that nothing can happen without people but nothing remains without institutions. And so I wish to thank the personal effort that you are all making, each and every one of you, to boost cooperation between Europe and Latin America and Ibero-America, but also I thank the institutions for institutionalizing this cooperation within the EuroLat format, and I'm honored to be part of this. The European Data Protection Supervisor is one of the European institutions, and it is the independent control body for data protection. Our legal basis is a European regulation 2018-1795, and the current supervisor is Wojciech Wiwerowski, who prior to taking up this position was director of the Polish Data Protection Office. Our secretariat is made up of some 120 staff. And we provide advice to the institutions in non-binding agreements, but the reports must be requested, and they are extremely influential in terms of the way they are dealt with, and they hold very high standing in the legislative process within Europe. Now, in the near future, we will be receiving additional powers, new powers when it comes to artificial intelligence. And this is something that I would like to briefly elaborate on towards the end of my speech today, because I think there's a great future in store for us in our regions. As Mr. Torreblanca said, protection of data and digital rights is something of a geopolitical issue today. In the G7, a working group was set up to look at data protection and looking at data protection authorities. Other bodies in Europe and elsewhere issued a report on the 22nd of June in Japan, where they say there's a need to create more bridges and convergence between the European Union and the Ibero-American region. And so against this backdrop, can I urge our partners in Latin America and Ibero-America to bring their standards closer to the European standards, so that we can have this kind of authorization and granting of status, granting a status to all those who meet our protection standards, and so that the Ibero-American Data Protection Network has been carrying out important and significant work, and I was given the honor to look into the equivalence and adaptation process for Argentina. I was a young expert at the time, and I have gathered experience. I have experience that I'm very happy to share with you to try and guide you in this process. I do think that this can be very important when it comes to interoperability and helping to facilitate investment in the regions. Now, how can we strengthen protection of data and digital rights? I humbly say that we, as data protection officers, have a contribution that we can make. Why? Because we have been pioneers in this field. Some 25 years now, we've been working in the European Union, and we have learned important lessons that I would like to share with you. The first thing that we were able to learn is that a law that remains on paper is a law that is born dead in the water, and it can only play its part when it becomes part of a culture. It is adopted by the culture and wider society. Culture is the key thing. A country can become prosperous when there is a work ethic, an innovative spirit, an enterprising spirit. And you can only have a wealthy society when there's entrepreneurship and education. And a country can only become democratic when there is a culture that dominates, that is protecting rights, including digital rights. And so a cultural shift can only come about gradually. It doesn't happen overnight. But once that has been achieved, the impact is significant, and it is a lasting impact. And that's something that we have been able to see. Changes in culture shifts, behavioral shifts can only be achieved through incentives, the right incentives being set. It's not enough to have a catalogue of digital rights. We need incentives for businesses, for organizations and institutions to truly comply with the rights that citizens should enjoy. And that can only happen if you have independent control bodies that can oblige, that can ensure that those rights are respected and that there is enforcement. So we need to have sufficient incentives for society to react. The European Union was able to learn this lesson, and this is why on the 15th of December, the European Declaration on the Principles and Rights of the Economic and Digital world. I can't talk about the declaration in any detail now, but I'd like to say that in the declaration, we do talk about the need for an equitable digital environment and also the responsible development of algorithms and artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence clearly plays a major part in this policy area. We all are very much aware of the potential harm that could be inflicted if new technologies are misused, and the harm that's been done in terms of our societies: disinformation, polarization, manipulation, lifting of the privacy rights of citizens in a wholesale way. And this is why it's crucial that we take the issue of digital rights very seriously now. How can we translate what's on paper into what happens and goes on in our societies? Now, all these years that I've been working in this field bring me to make the following recommendations. I wish to come back to humanist principles, not a traditional form of humanism, a digital form of humanism. Digital humanism, if you will, which will allow us to take a positive stance vis-à-vis new technologies. We shouldn't shun or shirk away from new technology. We should embrace change and technologies, but we have to ensure that these technologies are underpinned by ethical principles and inviolable rights of human beings. And so, if I may, I think we should have a Hippocratic oath, some sort of ethical standard that all developers need to subscribe to, so that they can avoid harm being inflicted on citizens. Now, isn't it worrying that the very IT engineers working in Silicon Valley ban their kids from using the very technologies they design? All of this gives us food for thought, and that's why we have to have the ethical principles underlining the sector itself. If I could mention briefly commercial aviation. Is it dangerous to take people up in an aircraft to 700 feet above ground? Yet we manage to do it. It seems dangerous, yet we do it all the time, and it's possible. Why? Because we have regulation. We have aviation regulation that is very stringent, very demanding, global, and which allows us to ground any aircraft that is not complying with security and safety rules. Well, this is exactly what we have to do with AI. We must be flexible enough to not strangle innovation, but we must have an international body, in European first as a first step, but then international, so that we can have efficient management of new developments and kick out anyone who, at the first sign of someone misusing these new technologies. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Cervera Navas and Mr. Torreblanca, for your excellent presentations. Now, we are struggling for time. Of course, we would like everyone to be able to speak, but we do have very little time, so we can only take 4 comments, 2 from the Latin American side, 2 from the European side. So can I beg your understanding and indulgence on this, and may I suggest that you stand up and you place the microphone in a vertical position so that the interpreters can hear you speak clearly, because there are some problems with the technology and the audio feed reaching the interpreter. So if I may request that you stand up, please, and speak directly into the microphone in an upright position. I'd like to give the floor to Ms. Villegas Canchi now. Honourable member, just for 2 minutes, please, to keep time.
Así. Ahora sí.
Okay. Honourable members of Parliament, you're here today to discuss an extremely important topic. It's absolutely critical to the future of Mexico and the European Union, and that is the rights and strategies applicable for the digital world. Our world is ever more interconnected and based on technology, so it's fundamental that we redouble our efforts to tackle these challenges. We need to take advantage of the benefits, but we must also address the challenges. One of the things we need to look at carefully is cybersecurity. Mexico and the European Union agree that it is absolutely vital to have an open cyberspace, but it needs to be secure and it needs to be neutral. We firmly believe that multilateralism is the best way to achieve this. And this is why we work actively together. We have a working group of open composition, which works on cybersecurity, information technology, and communication networks. Our guiding principles are to ensure that international law is applied at all times, that rules applying to cyberspace are respected, and that human rights are protected properly, and information technology is developed on the basis of principles and mutual trust and confidence. So we recognize the importance of tackling cybercrime too. We need to ensure that we have adequate instruments to achieve effective international cooperation, to exchange information and best practice, and to strengthen the tools that we have available to us. Cybersecurity is so important, but it is not the only challenge. We must come together to tackle a number of additional challenges. For example, the reduction in the digital divide. This is really important. Mexico and the European Union have agreed for some time that equitable access to digital technology and to the internet is a fundamental right, and it's essential to addressing the digital divide and the ensuing inequalities. Therefore, we need to take every opportunity that we can of availing ourselves of digital technologies, but we need to do so fairly. Work between the EU and Mexico is a very positive initiative. We're working together to try to roll back the digital divide, to enhance digital literacy, and to promote innovation. And I hope that we can continue to work forward on this basis. A successful future will, of course, depend on our abilities to work together, to share our shared advances, and to bring our citizens on board. We need to be determined and committed in tackling these challenges, but we also need to be visionary and confident of progress. Together, Mexico and the European Union can forge a shining digital and technological future which can be of benefit to everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Members of Parliament, could I please appeal to you to stick to your times slot because we are actually over time already. Mr. López Aguilar, 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Contribuciones que hemos escuchado de los expertos que han sido inspiradoras y estimulantes para la cooperación que podemos animar desde una reunión interparlamentaria, desde la representación del Parlamento Europeo en esta Asamblea Interparlamentaria Unión Europea-EuroLat. Me gustaría realzar esa oportunidad en el campo de la transferencia de datos, que es crucial para la cooperación judicial, además de la policial, en la lucha contra la criminalidad internacional transfronteriza, que es la criminalidad de nuestro tiempo, la organizada transfronteriza, y por supuesto también para las transacciones comerciales, que es todo el objeto del trabajo que hacemos aquí. Permítame que comparta con ustedes mi experiencia como legislador europeo. Presido desde hace años la Comisión de Libertades, Justicia e Interior, que es la comisión legislativa competente en desarrollo de derechos fundamentales, y la protección de datos sin duda lo es, la privacidad y la confidencialidad de los datos personales. La Unión Europea ha establecido el estándar más alto del mundo. Lo hicimos en la primera legislatura en que presidí esta comisión, 2009-2014, entrando en vigor el Tratado de Lisboa con la Carta de Derechos Fundamentales de la Unión Europea. Y ese estándar tan alto nos ha creado tensiones con socios principales, incluidos los Estados Unidos, cuyo proceso legislativo está bloqueado desde hace demasiado tiempo y no puede producir una legislación federal sobre protección de datos equiparable a la nuestra. Y, sin embargo, sigue siendo necesaria con la comunidad latinoamericana esta cooperación reforzada en materia de lucha contra el crimen y de transacciones comerciales. Y es perfectamente posible. De hecho, Ignacio Torreblanca ha aludido a que ya se ha conseguido una decisión de adecuación con 2 estados de la comunidad latinoamericana. ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué no con más? ¿Por qué no realzar esta oportunidad? Y creo que la influencia que podemos ejercer desde nuestro trabajo parlamentario puede ser relevante para completar este objetivo. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a darle la oportunidad ahora del componente latinoamericano, el parlamentario Brayson. Adelante, 2 minutos, por favor.
Thank you. I would like to present in English, as I represent an English-speaking portion of the Caribbean Latin American Parliament. On the topic of digital rights, a lot of attention has been given on artificial intelligence. I can understand that's the hot topic lately, but I don't think we should ignore also the prevalence of blockchain technology. The fact is, blockchain technology and cryptocurrency is extremely prevalent, especially in the Caribbean and Latin America. I believe this phenomenon should not be ignored any longer, and we must consider what policies we plan to implement that benefits but also safeguards our citizens, their data, and in some cases their funds. In terms of benefits, making use of blockchain ledger technology could possibly solve a lot of the issues that were mentioned here today. The digital intellectual property rights can be protected by tokenizing on public blockchain ledgers. Transparency is addressed by the use of Web3 technology, which also makes use of public ledgers. Protection of data under Web3 has been proven to be extremely secure. The possible drawbacks, however, could be the lack of centralized responsibility, which is important for our judiciary. So safeguards need to be in place, but I get the feeling that very few of us know or want to know how to handle Web3 and blockchain technology in national legislation. So I believe it's important for the EU, Latin America, and the Caribbean to pool our resources to find the right legislative balance, not ignoring or worse yet, banning the use of this technology, but coming up with policies that both promote and safeguard the use of this technology. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias. Vamos finalizando la intervención de los parlamentarios con nuestra parlamentaria del Parlamento Europeo, la diputada Bilbao.
Gracias, presidente.
2 minutos, por favor.
Voy a ser obediente y voy a levantarme para que se escuche bien y puedan interpretar correctamente.
Muchísimas gracias.
Yo creo que está todo dicho después de la intervención de mi colega y de mi compañero, que como han podido ver es especialista. Yo agradecer la intervención del señor Torreblanca y del señor Cervera Navas, simplemente para decir que comparto las reflexiones y lo lanzado, que efectivamente este es otro reto de colaboración con América Latina. Hemos hablado de cómo abordar los problemas de la delincuencia etcétera. Creo que el ámbito digital, la digitalización es una herramienta imprescindible y sobre todo porque estamos viviendo el fenómeno de la polarización, la manipulación, las falsas noticias y al final todo ello lo que está haciendo es poner en cuestión también las democracias más maduras a nivel europeo y diría que también está afectando a América Latina y en el ámbito global. Y bueno, y tengo que decir que efectivamente la agencia europea tiene prestigio porque nosotros hemos solicitado en algunos de los informes donde hemos tenido bastantes dudas su colaboración y el prestigio que tiene pues, nos ha permitido avanzar en la línea correcta. Así que creo que hay que avanzar en la colaboración Unión Europea-América Latina, sí o sí, y además hay que hacerlo de manera urgente. Y creo que hay un ámbito en el que sí que hay que incidir de manera especial, y es en la educación de las personas jóvenes, las personas mayores y las personas más vulnerables, porque también nos estamos encontrando con ámbitos digitales tan abiertos que son accesibles, en muchos casos intuitivos o incluso agresivos, y que obligan a muchas personas de estos tres colectivos a tomar decisiones que tienen unas consecuencias tremendas en distintos ámbitos de sus vidas. Así que creo que avanzar sí, pero hay que tener un capítulo especial en el tema educativo. Gracias.
Gracias, parlamentaria. De esta forma finalizamos las conclusiones de los parlamentarios en sus preguntas. Vamos a darle la oportunidad por el espacio de 2 minutos a los expositores para que concluyan las preguntas de los parlamentarios. Empezamos con el licenciado José Ignacio Torreblanca. 2 minutos para su conclusión.
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias por las preguntas y observaciones. Diré que algunos de los cálculos sobre el coste de la ciberinseguridad en América Latina cifran en 90.000 millones de dólares los costes de esta ciberinseguridad, lo cual debe ser visto como un fondo casi para la formación de personas y capacidades críticas y de refuerzos institucionales. En el informe que hicimos para el Servicio de Acción Exterior Europea y el Consejo de Asuntos Exteriores de la Unión Europea en julio del 22, pedimos y recomendamos, ya que están aquí los europarlamentarios, insistiremos en ello, que toda regulación digital deba incorporar el impacto exterior de esta regulación, así como los instrumentos para tratar y fomentar la internacionalización. No vale decir que el efecto Bruselas es que yo apruebo una regulación y los demás se la descargan y la estudian, sino trabajemos activamente en la internacionalización y en el impacto exterior, en crear esos lazos desde el principio del proceso regulatorio, incorporando, si es posible, en el propio proceso regulatorio europeo las voces y necesidades de los socios con los que luego vamos a tener que cooperar en la implementación de esas políticas. Me parece fundamental. Y el último punto, por supuesto, es también pedir a la región que refuerce sus capacidades de cooperación internacional en materia de ciberseguridad, derechos digitales y amenazas híbridas, vinculándose, como ya están haciendo muchos países, con la red europea de embajadores digitales, porque esa es una plataforma para compartir experiencias también muy positivas. Por supuesto, los menores son los más, y los adolescentes, especialmente las mujeres, y las minorías son los más vulnerables a todos estos efectos de la desinformación y creo que es muy importante tener ese foco siempre puesto y no perderlo. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias al señor José Ignacio Torreblanca. Ahora vamos a darle la oportunidad al señor Leonardo Cervera Navas para que finalice con sus conclusiones. Le pedimos 2 minutos, por favor. Adelante.
Muchas gracias, con la venia. Muchas gracias a la señora Villegas y a la señora Bilbao por sus contribuciones, igualmente al señor López Aguilar y al señor Bryson. En el año 1948, Anthony Blair, más conocido por George Orwell, escribió su última pieza literaria, ya moribundo de tuberculosis, que todos conocemos, 1984. El señor Blair, que había sido testigo y víctima tanto del totalitarismo estalinista como del totalitarismo nazi, denunció al mundo con la clarividencia de un moribundo que el totalitarismo futuro vendría de la mano del uso de la tecnología. Lo dijo muy claramente y dijo que el final de ese proceso sería el control de nuestras mentes. Y les recuerdo que estamos empezando ya a pensar seriamente en la existencia de neuroderechos. Es decir, que el señor Anthony Blair, George Orwell, sabía muy bien de lo que hablaba. El señor Torreblanca lo ha dicho muy claramente en su intervención, la democracia retrocede en el mundo. Cada año vamos para atrás. Hay más estados que no cumplen con los estándares democráticos. Y el mal uso de la tecnología es una de las razones que están detrás de este fenómeno. Se está viendo claramente que se están creando dos mundos, dos campos, el campo democrático y el campo totalitario. Y Europa y la región iberoamericana tiene que estar claramente en el campo democrático. Y tenemos que decir que no, unidos a un mal uso de la tecnología y a un mal uso de la inteligencia artificial. El Supervisor Europeo de Protección de Datos lo ha dicho muy claramente en el debate. Hay determinados usos de la tecnología que son contrarios a nuestros principios democráticos y se deben de prohibir. El ejemplo más claro es la identificación biométrica remota en los espacios públicos, que convertiría a nuestra sociedad en una sociedad orwelliana, que nos trata a todos los ciudadanos como potenciales criminales y nos somete a una vigilancia permanente en los espacios públicos. Este es solo un ejemplo, habrá más, y es importantísimo que haya instituciones independientes, internacionales, que puedan parar este tipo de desarrollos con eficacia y sin burocracia, es decir, con poderes, con sanciones, actuando en 24 horas para sacar del circuito estos malos usos de la tecnología. Gracias.
De esta forma concluimos aquí. Muchísimas gracias a todos y en particular a nuestros expertos invitados por el interesante y enriquecedor debate sobre este asunto. Lo despedimos con un fuerte aplauso. Muchísimas gracias. Vamos a darle la oportunidad y felicitamos. Todavía no hemos terminado, parlamentarios. Todavía no hemos terminado. Todavía falta un punto. Queremos saludar y a la vez felicitar la presencia de nuestro presidente del Parlamento Centroamericano, que el día jueves será juramentado como el nuevo presidente de EuroLat, el diputado parlamentario Amado Cerrut, que nos acompaña el día de hoy. Muchísimas gracias por su presencia, presidente del Parlamento Centroamericano, y el día jueves será juramentado como nuevo copresidente de EuroLat. Ahora sí le damos la oportunidad a nuestra copresidenta, Mónica Silvana González, para que finalice este gran debate de esta comisión política. Los micrófonos suyos, nuestra copresidenta parlamentaria Mónica Silvana. Gracias a todos los colegas parlamentarios por su atención.
Gracias, diputado Sicardi. Vamos con el tiempo muy ajustado. Tendríamos que haber terminado ya. Los intérpretes están haciendo un exceso de su tiempo y le agradezco, pero les pido la colaboración para poder concluir esta comisión lo antes posible y terminar el orden del día previsto. El punto número 7 tiene que ver con las propuestas de informes y temas para el debate para las próximas reuniones de esta comisión. Como ya se ha anunciado en otras ocasiones, en principio cabe someter a la sesión plenaria un informe por comisión permanente, por lo tanto podremos aprobar el título de un informe y 2 temas de debate. Le pedimos, por supuesto, un brevísimo tiempo en la exposición, a modo de solo 1 minuto, para que propongan un tema de estudio y 2 temas de debate para la próxima comisión. Yo sugiero un tema de debate para la comisión siguiente, la comisión que se va a celebrar en la reunión de EuroLat en la República Dominicana en el mes de noviembre. Sugiero que uno de los temas que debatamos en esta comisión sea acerca sobre la ciberseguridad, dado que en dicho país, en la República Dominicana, existe el Centro de Cibercapacidades de Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Es un centro de entrenamiento y aprendizaje en el área de la ciberseguridad para toda la región región y está sufragado con fondos de la Unión Europea a través de los programas de cooperación internacional. Por lo tanto, dejo sobre la mesa una propuesta de temas de debate, con lo tanto invito a los parlamentarios a que propongan un segundo tema de debate y un tema sobre estudio. Además del estudio de informe que tendríamos ocasión de debatirlo en Dominicana. Yo creo que nada más, tenemos perfecto. Entonces, abrimos brevemente una intervención. Solamente voy a dar palabras a 2 diputados del componente latinoamericano y 2 diputados del componente europeo para poder ajustarnos en la medida de lo posible y acabar cuanto antes. Diputados que quieran intervenir, veo por allí las manos levantadas, no alcanzo a recordar. El señor Pacheco, disculpe, del componente latinoamericano, y el diputado Bryson del componente latinoamericano también. Invito al componente europeo a que también proponga algún tema de estudio o un tema de debate.
Muchas gracias, Presidenta. Celebro que por fin estemos unidos después de 8 años, Unión Europea y América Latina. Eso nos da vigor para adelante. Quiero proponerme, por favor, como coponente en el tema sobre el fortalecimiento de la cooperación judicial en la lucha contra la delincuencia transnacional en la Unión Europea y en América Latina y el Caribe, en el marco de la armonización jurídica y del derecho comunitario. Ruego, por favor, a mis colegas que puedan, sus señorías, aprobar esta posición. Gracias.
¿Más? Señor Bryson, del componente europeo, ¿algunas palabras? El diputado Juan Fernando López Aguilar, seguido al diputado Bryson.
Thank you. Looking at the resolution that we passed earlier today, Resolution 14, that stresses that reducing poverty and sovereign debt will be key elements of the global recovery, and this can be achieved with more and better international cooperation. I think this is a very important issue that is a reality for Latin America and the Caribbean. We've seen that as a result of COVID-19, debt has risen from 58% of GDP to now 72% of GDP according to the World Bank. For this reason, I would like to propose either a report or a debate. What is the level of debt accumulated directly as a result of COVID-19, and what effect has this had on the fiscal future of countries within Latin America and the Caribbean? And how can Europe, Latin America, and the Caribbean come up with programs to address these COVID loans? Yeah, that's the topic.
Y una sugerencia, por favor, cíñanse a las competencias de esta comisión. El título que usted propone en este momento necesitamos primero un título y segundo es de otra comisión. Ese tema pertenece a la Comisión de Asuntos Sociales, no a la comisión política en la que estamos debatiendo. ¿Quiere proponer otro tema, diputado, antes de cortarle la palabra?
No, just wanted to explain. We passed a resolution today about COVID-19 and the effect. So I thought it would fit within this. Do we just make reports and then do no follow-up? I think it would be good to follow up on Resolution 14, but if not, then it's okay.
Sí. Ya tenía antes López Aguilar. Diputado López Aguilar, cuando usted quiera.
La manera más constructiva de trabajar es buscar hilos conductores entre las distintas propuestas en lugar de hacerlas competir entre sí, en modo que podamos establecer un denominador común. Ciberseguridad, lucha contra la criminalidad y los desarrollos legislativos que tienen lugar en estos momentos en el Parlamento Europeo sobre inteligencia artificial, que tienen aplicaciones muy concretas a la lucha contra la criminalidad con compromisos con los derechos fundamentales, como recordaba Leonardo Cervera, usos prohibidos de la inteligencia artificial y usos sensibles de la inteligencia artificial cuando toca a law enforcement agencies o a judicatura o fiscalía. Quizá esos hilos conductores con la seguridad pueden contribuir a formar una propuesta de resolución y de informe a partir de las aportaciones que ya hemos escuchado.
Diputado, ¿nos repite el título exacto que le gustaría que sea la propuesta?
Ciberseguridad, lucha contra el crimen y usos prohibidos de la inteligencia artificial.
Lucha contra el crimen y usos prohibidos.
Aplicaciones prohibidas de la inteligencia artificial.
Gracias. Diputado Cruz Coque, del componente latinoamericano. Tiene un minuto, por favor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta. Junto con saludar a mis colegas, sí, yo propongo en la línea de lo que se ha conversado y en virtud de las espléndidas exposiciones que hemos tenido en materia de inteligencia artificial, seguir la línea planteada también por mi colega López Aguilar y buscar tal vez tratar la adaptación de la legislación latinoamericana respecto de aquella que está siguiendo la Comunidad Europea en términos de inteligencia artificial y sus mecanismos o métodos de control y ciberseguridad. Me parece que en esos dos temas eventualmente podríamos configurar la posibilidad de hacer también un follow-through a lo que se está tratando acá y yo creo que van a ser los temas que probablemente van a seguir ocupando estos foros en el futuro. Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Gracias. ¿Alguna intervención más? ¿Alguna propuesta más, tanto de estudio como de tema de debate? Diputada Castillo, que acaba de llegar, si quiere hacer alguna propuesta, es su turno. Diputada González, del componente latinoamericano.
Gracias. Pues mire, a mí me parece muy importante que no dejemos de trabajar, que todos sigamos haciendo esfuerzos para no dejar de lado la agenda ambiental. ¿Sí? El impacto del cambio climático en América Latina, el Caribe y la Unión Europea en el marco de conservar el derecho humano a la salud, porque nos está afectando mucho en este sentido.
Diputada, es interesantísimo el tema que propone, pero le repito lo mismo que al diputado anterior. Son temas que pertenecen a otra comisión, no a la Comisión de Derechos Humanos y Asuntos Políticos.
Muchas gracias.
¿Alguna propuesta más que podamos incluirla en las propuestas a debatirse y a proponerse como temas de estudio para la próxima? Entonces, de momento tenemos 3. ¿Repito las propuestas? No. De momento tenemos 2 propuestas que caben en esta comisión, que sería el fortalecimiento de la cooperación judicial y la propuesta sobre la lucha contra el crimen y los usos indebidos de inteligencia artificial. Si os parece bien, dejamos a los 2 secretariados de los 2 componentes que trabajen para encontrar el mejor anclaje, el mejor estructura para que estos 2 temas tengan cabida en nuestra próxima reunión en la República Dominicana en el mes de noviembre. Si no hay ninguna oposición a esta propuesta, pasamos directamente al punto 9 para intentar concluir esta comisión. Ya llevamos media hora de retraso, pero lo antes posible. La Secretaría de EuroLat anunciará oportunamente la fecha y lugar de la próxima reunión de la Comisión de Asuntos Políticos, de Seguridad y Derechos Humanos. En principio, esperamos poder reunirnos en Santo Domingo, República Dominicana, durante la última semana de octubre y la primera semana de noviembre. Muchas gracias nuevamente a los ponentes que han permanecido durante toda la comisión. Es un lujo tenerlo en esta comisión con su trayectoria, con su experiencia y que será fuentes de inspiración para nuestro trabajo parlamentario. Muchas gracias a los participantes que se han dado cita y a los intérpretes por el exceso del tiempo que han destinado, a los equipos técnicos, a los sugieres, a las secretarías por su excelente trabajo. Y repito nuevamente lo que dijimos al comienzo, es un honor poder continuar el trabajo hecho en la excelente declaración de la cumbre EuroLat de la semana pasada en Bruselas y recordar que esta importante declaración incluye en el párrafo 34 un reconocimiento al trabajo parlamentario, un reconocimiento al trabajo de EuroLat durante todos estos años. Y en mi condición de doble identidad también latinoamericana de origen, no dejo esta oportunidad para también felicitarnos por haber incluido en el párrafo 13 de esta declaración de EuroLat el reconocimiento a las Islas Malvinas, unas islas en conflicto, dado que ya el Reino Unido no pertenece a la Unión Europea. Por lo tanto, creo que nuestro trabajo parlamentario se vio reflejado en la declaración de la cumbre EuroLat y nos corresponde ahora a los diputados y diputadas continuar nuestro trabajo a través de la diplomacia parlamentaria. Muchas gracias a todos.